There's a moment when assumptions shatter like glass, when confidence built on nothing real meets competence forged in fire. Picture this. A conference room filled with America's elite warriors, a decorated admiral making casual judgments about ink on skin, and the sudden, terrible realization that he just insulted someone whose trigger finger has written history he'll never match. This isn't about proving people wrong. It's about what happens when leadership confuses loudness with legitimacy, when someone mistakes their rank for wisdom, and when 200 of the most dangerous humans on Earth suddenly stand at attention for a captain nobody thought twice about. Let me take you to Fort Moore, Georgia, where red clay turns bronze under the afternoon sun, and the air smells like weapon oil and hard lessons about to be learned. She stood outside the Joint Operations Integration Facility with the kind of stillness that comes from muscle memory, not nervousness. Captain Jade Merrick, 31 years old, looked like 1,000 other Army officers on any given day. Regulation, haircut, pressed uniform. The bearing of someone who ran marathons and understood discipline. Nothing about her screamed special. That was the point. The compound was buzzing. Rangers, Green Berets, Delta operators, Navy SEALs, all converging for the quarterly symposium where people who did impossible things for a living came to compare notes on staying alive. She'd been teaching here for nearly a year, instructing advanced marksmanship to students who thought they'd already mastered everything worth knowing about putting rounds on target. Most treated her professionally, but there was always that edge, the sense that they were humoring her rather than learning from her. Her visible record showed the basics. Infantry officer, Ranger qualified, sniper school distinguished graduate for combat tours. Some medals. What it carefully omitted could fill a classified vault. Lieutenant Colonel Victor Kane stood beside her, a former Delta operator whose face looked like it had been rebuilt after too many rough landings. He'd fought bureaucratic wars to get her this instructor slot, pushing back against people who thought a woman teaching special operations sent the wrong message about standards. He touched her elbow lightly, signaled to pay attention. Inside, Rear Admiral Craig Thornton was approaching the podium, 26 years of service decorations across his chest, the confident stride of someone who'd spent his career being right about important things. Currently serving as Deputy Commander for a Joint Special Operations Task Force. What came next would be educational. Just not for the people he expected. Jade learned patience at 12 years old in eastern Montana, where a grandfather taught her to hunt mule deer across terrain so open that rush shots meant tracking wounded animals through miles of country that could kill you if you were UN careful. Lucas Merrick was a Korean War veteran, a designated marksman with the 1st Marine Division at Chosin Reservoir, who survived temperatures that froze, weapons solid, and enemy soldiers who came in human waves, designed to overwhelm through numbers alone. He taught his granddaughter what he'd learned in that frozen nightmare. Shooting wasn't about power or speed. It was about patience, breath control, and understanding that the hardest part wasn't pulling the trigger. It was waiting for the exact right moment. She'd joined the Army instead of the Marines, a practical choice when West Point recruiters pointed out that the Army had opened infantry to women, while the Corps was still figuring out political optics. Ranger school had been brutal. She'd lost 14 pounds she couldn't spare and broke her left hand during the mountain phase. But she'd finished. Then sniper school, where she outperformed 31 male candidates, despite instructors who made it quietly clear they considered the whole thing a diversity experiment. Joint Special Operations Command found her during her 2nd Iraq deployment. She'd been providing overwatch for a conventional patrol in Mosul when a Delta element got pinned by an ISIS sniper. Working from a building complex 300 meters away, Jade identified the position, calculated her hold in under 30 seconds, and eliminated the threat with one shot through a window opening that gave her maybe 8 inches of exposure. The JSOC commander watched through a Predator feed and requested her for temporary assignment within 48 hours. 3 years attached to the task force, running counter-sniper operations in Mosul, Ramadi, Fallujah, hunting people who were hunting Americans. The work was surgical, methodical, permanent. She carried one ghost, heavier than all the others. Staff Sergeant David Chun, her spotter, killed on their 23rd mission in Ramadi. They'd been providing security overwatch for a sensitive site exploitation when a second enemy sniper, one they'd missed in permissioned reconnaissance, fired from an elevated position they'd assessed as cleared. Chun shifted to give her a better angle at the exact moment the round arrived. She'd acquired and eliminated the enemy shooter 6 seconds later. 870 meters through urban heat distortion. But Chun bled out before medevac could land, looking at her with eyes that seemed confused about what had just happened. JSOC kept her in theater another 14 months after that. 68 additional eliminations. They showed her intelligence assessments, proving her operations saved American lives. She knew it was true. She also knew Chun died because she'd been focused on the wrong sector for 3 seconds, and no amount of mission success would ever balance that equation. Now she taught precision marksmanship to operators who'd never watched a teammate die through a rifle scope. Every class and threat assessment in sector discipline, she thought about. Chun and the promise she'd made that the next generation would have the skills to survive the mistakes that killed them. The symposium had been running 2 hours when Thornton noticed her in the instructor section. His presentation covered joint interoperability, but he kept circling back to themes about physical attributes required for precision shooting, about objective standards that couldn't be adjusted to accommodate demographics, about how the military's primary mission was lethality, not social engineering. He gestured toward the instructor lineup while making these points, his attention settling on Jade just long enough that everyone present understood exactly who he meant. During the break, he approached directly, flanked by 2 staff officers who carried themselves like they'd spent careers being the hardest people in any room. He asked about her assignment, her deployment history, whether she'd served in actual combat operations or primarily support roles. The questions were professionally phrased. The implication was obvious: diversity hire. Someone promoted beyond competence to satisfy political requirements. Then he noticed the tattoo on her right forearm. Geometric patterns that looked like abstract design to anyone who didn't know better. "What's a girl like you doing with a tattoo like that?" His voice carried, "What's your actual MOS, sweetheart? Admin or supply?" The word sweetheart hung in the air like cordite. Several nearby officers looked uncomfortable. His staff officers smiled like this was exactly the leadership they expected from a flag officer. Jade kept her face neutral, hands relaxed, gray eyes cataloging everything without revealing anything. She'd dealt with senior officers like Thornton before, successful enough to be influential, confident enough to broadcast assumptions, experienced enough to wrap prejudice and professional concerns about standards and readiness. Captain Marcus Webb, a Special Forces officer teaching nearby, stepped forward and suggested perhaps the Admiral would be interested in a practical demonstration of capabilities the Marksmanship Center was producing. Thornton agreed with the expression of someone humoring misguided subordinates. That's when Colonel Kane materialized from the crowd, oak leaves catching fluorescent light, face showing the particular expression that came right before someone made a significant mistake. He asked Jade one question. "Would you be willing to demonstrate your actual qualifications?" She started rolling up her sleeve. That evening in her quarters, Jade sat looking at the photograph on her nightstand. Chun outside the safe house in Ramadi, both in full kit, with dust on everything, his arm across her shoulders, both grinning despite being 50 hours into a 72-hour mission. She remembered how his arm had felt, the sound of his voice calling wind corrections, the absolute trust he'd had even when conditions made most snipers request mission abort. Her hands weren't shaking. They never shook. That was the whole point of 10,000 hours of training. But there was tightness in her chest from spending an entire day not putting Thornton on the ground after he dismissed 4 years of combat operations as administrative theater. She touched the tattoo, tracing patterns that looked random unless you knew the code. Each diamond represented 10 confirmed eliminations. Each circle represented 308 kills across 4 deployments, more than any other female sniper in American military history. Top 15 overall, despite being constantly told women didn't have the physical attributes for this work. The memory came sharp. Chun collapsing beside her in the hide sight. The sound of impact. His eyes going wide with surprise then confusion while she worked the bolt and acquired the target that had just killed him. She'd made the shot, but it hadn't mattered because Chun was bleeding from wounds no amount of trauma care could address, and Medivac was 9 minutes out when he needed it in 3. She made herself breathe the way her grandfather taught her, using her diaphragm to control her heart rate. Thornton represented every assumption she'd been fighting since Ranger School. That capability came from appearance. That credibility required fitting specific demographics. That women in combat specialties were political experiments, instead of warfighters who'd earned position through performance. Tomorrow would bring a test. She knew it the way she knew ballistic tables and wind formulas. Men like Thornton didn't back down easily. because backing down meant admitting error, and officers didn't make flag rank by admitting they were wrong about things that mattered to their worldview. Fortune, she thought, touching the photograph before turning off the light. For every operator who died learning lessons the hard way. For students she was trying to teach before they made mistakes that couldn't be fixed. The next morning brought clear skies and heat that made mirages shimmer across the 1,000-meter range. Colonel Kane arranged a live fire demonstration at range 37, the precision facility's sniper school used for final qualifications. Word spread overnight, and by 0830, there were over 200 personnel on the observation line. Rangers, Special Forces, Delta operators, SEALs, Air Force Special Tactics, plus instructors and field-grade officers who'd heard something significant was about to happen. Thornton stood at the front with his staff officers, expressions suggesting professional skepticism mixed with confidence of someone expecting to be proven right. The course of fire was standard but compressed. 8 targets, ranges from 500 to 1,000 meters, vary in conditions. 2 minutes to engage all targets. Most qualified snipers needed 12 minutes to complete this sequence with acceptable accuracy. 2 minutes was designed to create stress that exposed weaknesses. Jade took position behind an M201 enhanced sniper rifle, the Army's current precision weapon chambered in .300 Winchester Magnum. She settled into prone, stock welded to her cheek. Breathing dropping into rhythm she'd practiced until it was automatic as her heartbeat. The line went hot. First target, 500 meters. No wind. Acquired. Verified range. Press trigger. Impact center mass. Elapsed. Time. 6 seconds. Second target 650 meters. Mild crosswind. Calculated hold. Compensated. Fired. Center mass. 14 seconds. Elapsed. Targets 3 through 6 came in sequence. 700, 800, 900, 950 meters. Each required different calculations for wind, elevation, temperature effects on trajectory. She engaged each with mechanical precision that looked simple but required thousands of repetitions to develop. 83 seconds elapsed. The 7th target was the test. 1,000 meters. Moving laterally at walking speed, wind gusting. This separated technically proficient snipers from operators who understood working in dynamic conditions where nothing stayed constant. She tracked through the scope, calculated lead time, waited for the wind cycle, pressed through the brake. 2 seconds of flight time, long enough everyone watching could hear the report, feel the pause, see the target snap. Center mass impact, 1 minute 47 seconds elapsed. The observation line had gone silent. Final target was the complication. Thornton called an addition. 800 meters. Partial exposure. Simulated hostage scenarios. She acquired the exposure, verified zero-controlled breathing until she couldn't feel her own heartbeat, and fired. Clean hit through the exposure. Total elapsed time. 1 minute 56 seconds. 8 targets. 8 impacts. 0 misses. Completed in under 2 minutes, on a course designed to take 12. Then Thornton requested one more test. Cold bore shot on a different rifle at unconfirmed range. Colonel Kane looked at Jade. Her call whether to accept. She thought about the shot she'd made 6 seconds after he'd been hit about the 308 other times she'd put around exactly where it needed to go, because someone's life depended on her being perfect. She moved to a different firing point. Settled behind an M24 she'd never fired. Older weapon system being phased out but still in inventory. Range officer called the target. 750 meters. Full exposure, no preparation time. She chambered 1 round. Took possession, ran her mental checklist. Range estimation. Wind. Elevation. Parallax. Verification. Then controlled her breathing until the rifle became part of her body and pressed the trigger. Center mass impact. The observation line erupted. People talking over each other, some arguing about what they'd witnessed, others demanding qualification scores. Thornton stood motionless, face showing the expression of someone whose fundamental assumptions had just been dismantled by objective reality. Colonel Kane called Jade forward and told her to explain her tattoo to everyone present. Jade stood facing 200 special operations personnel and rolled her sleeve to the elbow. revealing the complete geometric pattern covering her forearm. To most observers, it looked like tribal art. To people who understood the symbology, it was a memorial written in a language that didn't require translation. Each diamond represents 10 confirmed eliminations, Colonel Kane explained to the silent crowd. Each circle represents 5. Captain Merrick has 308 confirmed kills across 4 combat deployments, with a joint special operations task force running counter-sniper operations in Mosul, Ramadi, and Fallujah. She holds the record for most confirmed eliminations by a female sniper in U.S. military history. The words created visible impact. Shock from younger personnel. Recognition from those who'd heard rumors about a task force sniper with an impossible success rate. Calculation from senior officers suddenly re-evaluating everything they'd assumed. Thornton's expression had shifted from shock to something darker. Embarrassment, mixed with anger, mixed with realization that he'd just publicly dismissed one of the most lethal precision shooters in American military history as an administrative placeholder. Colonel Kane continued. Captain Merrick has 2 Purple Hearts, Bronze Star with Valor device, and a classified unit citation for operations that will remain sealed. She was attached to our task force for 3 years running missions against high-value targets in urban terrain where conventional forces could operate effectively. Sergeant Major Rick Coleman, a Delta operator with 4 deployments and a face like tanned leather, stepped forward and addressed the crowd directly. He'd worked with Captain Merrick during her 3rd rotation. She'd provided overwatch for his element during a compound raid. Tactical awareness, identifying an enemy counterattack position nobody else spotted, eliminating 3 fighters before they could ambush his team. 2 more voices joined Coleman's testimony. Both JSOC operators confirming they'd worked with her during missions they could undetail, but that required exactly the tactical decision-making and operational skill Thornton had claimed women lacked. The Admiral's position had completely collapsed. Every argument he'd made about physical limitations, about standards being lowered, about women being unsuited for combat specialties had just been systematically dismantled by demonstrated capability and testimony from operators whose credibility couldn't be questioned. Colonel Kane delivered the conclusion. Captain Merrick is being promoted to Major effective next month following her promotion board results. She'll be reassigned as Deputy Commandant for Advanced Marksmanship at the Marksmanship Center of Excellence. Youngest officer to hold that position in the past 15 years. Thornton said nothing. There was nothing to say. He'd arrived intending to make a point about military standards and was leaving having been educated about what actual combat capability looked like. The crowd began dispersing, but dozens surrounded Jade, asking technical questions, requesting guidance, seeking knowledge that could only come from someone who'd actually done the work under conditions where mistakes were permanent. Thornton left with his staff officers, not looking back. His service, dressed blue, somehow less impressive than they'd been 2 hours earlier. The promotion ceremony happened 5 weeks later in a formation that included representatives from every special operations unit at Fort Moore. Major Jade Merrick stood at attention while Colonel Kane pinned oak leaves on her uniform, officially transforming her from someone who'd been questioned into someone whose expertise was institutionally recognized. The changes she implemented as Deputy Commandant were immediate and comprehensive. She brought in instructors who'd operated in contested environments, redesigned scenarios to reflect actual combat decision-making, created training that was harder and more realistic without crossing safety boundaries. She made students uncomfortable, pushed them past perceived limits, taught them that being a precision shooter wasn't about pulling triggers. It was about making decisions under pressure where being wrong meant people died. The real impact wasn't in curriculum changes. It was in what her promotion represented. The story spread through special operations communities, into conventional army units, across service branches. A female sniper with 308 confirmed kills had been dismissed by a flag officer and responded by demonstrating capabilities that made his arguments irrelevant. Young female soldiers saw proof that performance mattered more than prejudice. Male soldiers who'd been skeptical started reconsidering assumptions. Senior leaders who'd resisted change suddenly had an example they couldn't rationalize away. 4 months after the demonstration, she received a brief letter from Rear Admiral Thornton. Formal, carefully worded, direct. He acknowledged his comments had been based on incomplete information. Major Merrick's service record demonstrated capabilities that warranted respect, regardless of demographics. He hoped her work would continue producing warriors of her caliber. Jade read it once and filed it without responding. On a Sunday morning, she drove to Arlington and knelt beside Chun's headstone, tracing engraved letters while morning light filtered through oak branches overhead. She told him about the program changes, about students learning the lessons he'd helped teach her, about institutional shifts that meant fewer operators would die from preventable mistakes. His death hadn't been meaningless. Everything she'd built stood on what he'd taught her about being both a good shooter and a better human. She stayed until the sun was high, then walked back to her car, ready for whatever came next, carrying Chun's memory forward into a future where capability mattered more than appearance, and warriors were measured by what they could do instead of how they looked doing it.